So a little about me. My background, the biggest thing is I randomly decided like, hey, I'm tired of working security. I wanted to work in animation. So I started drawing and stuff a lot. And I ended up working at Pixar in the security department because that's how life works and it's funny like that. But it is cool because it gave me a lot of experience in seeing how a studio works. And Pixar was great because it was they allowed a lot of involvement. So I got to work with a lot of folks on there. I got to contribute to a couple of the projects there. After that, I worked at the Brick Foundation, which is a nonprofit that runs an apprenticeship program, the first state and federally recognized apprenticeship program, which is actually open, rolling enrollment for those that are interested in getting started. I'll tell you more about that. So they help get people started in the animation industry, trying to get more diverse people started in there, people from different backgrounds, not just from the animation schools and art schools. And I study a little bit with Netflix and their foundations program, the Via Mentorship program, there's Women in Animation, another great nonprofit, at Anim School, an online school. And then I also currently volunteer at Asians Animation, which is a community-based organization. You do not have to be Asian to join it. We offer a lot of cool programs, speaker series, portfolio reviews, things like that. We recently partnered with Sony and did a big speaker series with them, which was great. And create a lot of free resources for people. So that's kind of my background, where I come from. So one key thing when I talk about caveats is a lot of my background is more on the studio side, and we'll kind of cover some of the differences, how that might differ for us. I know indie animation is one of the big things, especially in the third community. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, about me. Yeah, so let's start with forms of animation. So animation is basically the process of taking something that doesn't normally move and creating the illusion of life. As the old Disney animations say. And there's a lot of different ones. Most common one is 2D animation, like the one that comes to everyone's mind is those big Disney films. Like a hand drawn, have a drawing, you have another drawing like a flip book, and it all comes together. Right? You have 3D animation and 2D puppet animation nowadays, which instead of having to draw each individual drawing, you now have little rigs on characters, which I'll show you a little bit as we get into the production side. You'll get to see some of what those rigs might look like. You basically start posing them like action figures, pose to pose, rather than having to draw each individual one. And then you have the stop motion stuff, which is like what like Leica does, Coraline, Wallace and Gromit, if you saw the most recent one that just came out on Netflix, where you're taking little figures and clay models and you're moving them step by step also. So there's also different ways things move. There's even ones that aren't here, there's more experimental ones. People will do like Lego. Lego is a big form of animation where people will do Lego movie, like brick animation. That's a whole separate genre that people will focus on. But the principles are all kind of the same because the way animation production works, all these, you have to approach it differently than you would a live action film production. So they either are very different, they'll have different things in here, but a lot of the overlaps as far as how you approach it. Okay. So how you make something, it's what we call in animation is the pipeline. And there's basically gets broken down into 3 main steps. There's pre-production stage, where you're kind of thinking about what your project is, planning it out. A big part of this is going to be storyboarding. So I was saying that the big difference between a live action film and an animation film is usually you have to do a lot of storyboarding animation film because drawing, you can't do like, I'm going to draw 500 drawings, see if it works, and then I'll do a second take. Like in live action film, you can shoot, and then let's do another take, let's do another take. Especially with digital now. And animation, that's a little harder, right? You can't spend like 3 weeks doing it to see if it might work. You have to plan it out. So storyboarding is a big thing. You'll even see that nowadays in a lot of very visual effects heavy live action films, like Mad Max, are very heavily storyboarded. So there's a lot of planning that goes into animation. That's probably one of the biggest things that's going to be differentiated from live action films. And then you have the production phase. That's usually when you take what you have planned out, what the characters will look like, what the film will look like, and you start actually creating those assets, creating the character models, actually animating things and planning that out. And then post-production is where you kind of pretty everything up, edit it out, edit everything together, composite in light and effects, and do that stuff there. So, and there's 3 main phases that we split it into there. Any questions so far? Or I'm going to start going into it. Okay. A cool video from, so this little screen grab here is actually DreamWorks put out a little Penguins of Madagascar like pipeline thing you can find. It's a little dated, but it's really cute and it actually does a pretty good job of explaining the pipeline process. So you can find that on YouTube if you look up DreamWorks pipeline. It's still up there. It's quite a nice little thing. Yeah, so pre-production. Animation is a very expensive and time-consuming process. So it requires a lot of different planning. So obviously, just like with a regular, with a live action film, you need to have a script, which is basically the outline of the story that says what everyone will say and do. Visual development will consist of usually the drawings of the characters, or like mood boards, like sort of mood art pieces, so people have an idea of what we're going to be shooting for in the last one. Storyboards, you'll see those in a bit, but those are kind of like drawings, like here's what the camera shot will look like and where the characters will be. Color scripts are going to be ideas like people will plan out even just like what color will this movie be. So if you ever get a chance to visit the Pixar campus, or there's actually a book called Pixar's Color Scripts, where you'll just see, which really I should have thrown a picture of that on here, but you'll see like rows of colors. You'll see the tonal color of the movie will change over time. People do scratch audio, so you get an idea for it, and usually it ends up with an animatic, which is like a very rough, where instead of seeing people move, you'll just see like blocks, like little stiff figures moving that aren't animated, so you can get a feel for what it'll all look like. But yeah, so this is some example of when you start development, people will be pitching ideas. You get these like art pieces to just give people a feel for an idea of what to do. And this is kind of often forgotten. Like there is a role in development. That's actually where people read through scripts and come figure out ideas and help people that are developing ideas make them workable for production. And that's actually a job you can work in, is in development. For those of you that really like idea generation and trying to refine them, it's one that a lot of people don't even know that there's work that focuses on that. And a lot of it will change. Like it'll come with different ideas, and it'll be totally different. Like Zootopia, if anyone's seen the original development ideas for Zootopia, it started off with like they had shot collars and stuff, and the predators were actually controlled with shot collars, and it just changes completely through the movie. So the original idea for the movie is often very different from how it goes. But once you have an idea of where you're going, so this is the color script. So I actually did put a color script. So you can see here, this is one part of visual development. It's a color script here. We can actually see like, oh, it starts off like bright colors, and then they get to nature, and it's a whole different color thing. And here's like probably a dark point in the story where something bad happening. And you can see here is a climax, all very forbidding colors and stuff. And then, oh, it resolves, and now everything's back to happy. So that is a job where people just paint these little color thumbnails. So if you like painting, there's jobs for that. Character design, we'll go into a little more detail how that can differ based on what medium, because you saw there's different mediums for each one, so how you approach designing a 3D character versus 2D character will be very different. But that's a job. There's people that just paint backgrounds and design backgrounds and props. So if you just like really drawing vehicles and tanks and mecha, you can specialize in that. Or if you prefer more illustrative pieces and you want to create those moments, like, oh, here's little Simba looking up at Mufasa, then that's another one. That's more visual development, where you're taking those characters and that background and combining, create moments that the storyboard artist and director can use to convey that idea of production. But everything, making an animation, everything needs to be designed ahead of time, right? Again, there's no winging it. Everything has to be planned out. Like, oh, there will be a box. You can't just be like, I'm going to find a box in this room and use it. You have to decide, what will that box look like? Art books are great. If anyone ever picks up an art book for like art of Zootopia or whatever, most of it will be filled with visual development stuff in there. But another big one is storyboards. So this is a really big role for those of you that are looking to work in animation. This is actually one of the biggest roles that they hire for, because there's so many scenes. Every scene needs to be storyboarded in animation. So for those of you that don't know what a storyboard is, it basically visually plots out what happens in it. Originally, earlier on in animation, we started off with what was called beat boards. So this is one from Secret of NIMH, where beat boards tend to hit the bigger, broader story beats of each thing. But as time has gone on, storyboards have gone a bit more advanced, and now you'll see they're actually almost like shot by shot. So this is first shot, and then they transition to close-ups and things like that. You guys can see the characters moving like it's not quite a flip book one, because you're not getting it, but you can see like, okay, this is what the character's gonna have to do and everything. And there's different levels of it. So it starts off very rough, and then if the idea gets approved, then they'll clean it up and revise it. So people that are looking for entry-level roles in this one, a storyboard revisionist is a very common entry-level role, where you're cleaning up other people's storyboards and learning how it works. That's a very rough one there, and I think you can see as they clean it up, they'll actually give an idea like, here's what the lighting and stuff will work. So the amount of detail in a board will vary by production. And for those of you that storyboarding is also neat because it also applies to live action production. So for those of you who have ever seen the famous Knives Out storyboard, where it's literally just like a smiley face with knives pointing, like little cross knives on it, that's a storyboard, but it works because it conveys the idea. And there's one thing that's interesting is if you ever get a storyboard book for Japanese animation, because those are in-house studios, the storyboards can be very simplified. So you'll see that Evangelion storyboard is literally just like a smiley face. But that's because the artists and the animators and stuff work right with each other, so they can explain like what it needs to look like and they can clarify that. If you see storyboards for television productions nowadays, where it's like the storyboard and pre-production stuff is done in the US and the production is done overseas, those storyboards will be very detailed and it'll be very important that they're on model because the people overseas will draw exactly what you put into storyboards in the script. So if anyone has ever seen, there's a scene I think Dexter's Lab where the audience rises out of their seat and they literally just fly out of their seat because the storyboard didn't show what happened with it. So they read the script, it was like, oh, they rise out of their seats. So they drew the audience rising out of their seats and floating into space. So you'll see, and that's why some storyboards, especially with overseas ones where it's different countries collaborating, they'll be very meticulous. And like, if you draw this person that looks too big on the screen, the artist over there in Malaysia is going to draw like this giant character because you drew it slightly off. So some different things versus feature films, because the production is done in-house, it tends to be a lot looser as a requirement. And so one of the end goals of pre-production is you're going to take those storyboards. You're also going to get what's usually a scratch audio, because usually at this point they're still leaving room for things to edit it and figure out like casting and things like that. And they'll put them all together, and editing will time it out. So they'll put them together and actually create a scene. So this is usually what the end of a pre-production phase will be hoping to get away with, to deliver and show the director before they can move to production is an animatic. So let me show you one from Raya of the Last Dragon.
Why are you making me wear this?
I'm doing this to protect you.
From who?
From everyone. We have to sneak into 5 different hostile nations.
In my day, there were no nations. Kumandra was one large, happy
Namari.
What's Namari?
Oh, what's drippin', Dewdrop? Oh, I see you finally made some friends. It's good that you're reaching out. I was worried you were gonna become a cat lady. Like me. So, what are you up to? You stole an ancient map and scrolls from the Royal Library.
Correction, I was just borrowing them. Indefinitely.
If you won't tell me what you're up to, maybe your friends will.
Heads up. The guy on the left looks twitchy.
Go ahead and step, see what kind of crazy I can get. Dinner time! Dinner time!
What? It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Why would you yell dinner?
Come on!
Yeah. So you can see a couple things with that thing. One is, there's different artists working on it, so you see that how they simplify the characters will change a bit without it. You'll see that the backgrounds are very simplified, but you're getting the idea of what shots and what will need to be in there. This is a CGI film, so they don't need to be as precise with the character models because it's going to be done in-house. The models are going to be set ahead of time, so there's no accidentally drawing the person wrong. But you get the feel for the story, right? Even though not all the shots are there, you know what's going to happen. Like if you had to go and fill in all the blanks with now those hundreds and hundreds of drawings or all the animation of the 3D models, then that would be the next step. And then if the director likes that, you can move on to production. And it's interesting, and you'll see that like, hey, this is not a scene from the movie, but that happens a lot. And this is why it's a lot cheaper to put this together and get this together for presentation, see if it works in the story, rather than doing the whole production and everything and then be like, oh wait, we spent 6 months on this and this doesn't work. So here, you can do this in probably a month or a couple weeks depending on your timetable and the team that you have. Yeah.
Why are you?
There we go. But yeah, any questions about the pre-production phase so far from anyone? So if you have an animatic that works and everything's locked in for production, you move on. So you'll have to make sure you have the backgrounds and the sets are all set. You'll have to make sure you have the characters and know what they'll look like. If you're doing 3D animation or doing puppet animation, you'll have to make sure those are all set up. Any technical effects, especially in 3D animation, there's a lot of computers involved nowadays that'll actually send, because no one wants to animate 500 pieces of fur on Sully, right? So you're gonna get a computer to kind of calculate that out, because that would be insane to do. And you also have to figure out some of the dialogue and planning, because that'll be a thing that you'll notice that, the mouth's just open in the animatic. You're not really planning out like the mouth sounds or anything like that. So that's gonna get more into the details of animation. So backgrounds, how you approach it is different from each sort of what type of medium you're using. 2D will often do, it's called we'll do the layout phase. So 2D layout is a little slightly similar to 3D. Also will use layout. It's basically like blocking the shot out. You plan out, you see with the 3D one, they drew out what the map will look like, and someone actually build a visual set for that. For the stop motion, they literally have a set that they have to construct and fabricate. In 2D, you can draw out the backgrounds, and then you'll see in 2D productions block out okay, this person will move from here to here on these. So 2D layouts are really specialized because they have to be designed specifically to look at the camera. You can't just whip the camera about. If you ever get into drawing 2D backgrounds, you might hear about something called banana pan, where the drawing of the background is actually this weird looking banana shape, because you can't actually just move the camera, you have to kind of fake the eye out and stuff like that. So you'll see some weird perspective drawing with 2-in-1. Versus 3D, you can move it more like a live action camera. But you'll see some crossover nowadays a lot, especially and even in the storyboard tools like Toon Boom Harmony, they'll have 3D built into it, where you can do 2D drawings mixed with 3D to create those more complex camera movements. So that's why you'll see a lot of more complex movements in films nowadays versus in the past. That'd be a lot more difficult without the assistance of 3D tools to mix that media together. Characters, so while people are working in environments, characters are a really big one. So you take those visual development ideas, those rough concept sketches are usually focused. So in the visual development stage, a lot of the character stuff is going to be focused on getting the feel for the character, what their personality is, general shapes and stuff. And then once you have that, a good feeling for that, then you'll have to lock it down to something that can be consistent throughout. So it can be doing model packs for people to be able to build models off of and showing hey, here's what the colors that we're going to make things, here's what everything will look like, here's what the actual shape will be beyond the rough sketch. And people have to do modeling and tailoring and everything. So modeling, creating 3D models. So this is a model pack for a 2D one and a 3D one. So you see for All Dogs Go to Heaven, it's a 2D one, so they actually show here's the exact proportions the artist will have to use. Here's what it might look like from different movements and angles. For 3D, they're showing the animators hey, this is how, if you want to make the heads look, we need it to be able to do these shapes for these ones. So these are 2D drawings, but then the riggers, animators, and stuff, the rigging and technical side will actually have to make it so that way, hey, can we actually create this shape with the tools? That way the animators have those tools. See Remy there, they broke that one down there. So designing all that out is a thing. Even props and such will have model sheets, so everything needs to be kind of designed out. Sometimes one of the steps that's really popular is people actually make 3D tools, so that way the artist can actually hold it up and turn it around. This is even whether it's a 2D production like that's for Spirit, which is a 2D film, or Emil from Red City over there for a 3D one, so that way do that. Stop motion, they have to build the actual puppets. So this is a couple of steps here. I've never had the joy of working on a stop motion puppet, but they're quite complex. So those of you that like to sew really tiny clothes for dolls, that's actually a job you can apply for up in Oregon, sewing really, really tiny clothes and making little tiny molds, because there's silicone skin that goes over them. And yeah, it's a whole very interesting thing. They also do some more 3D printing and stuff. There's different studios will use different approaches. Some will use silicone ones, some will use what's called face replacement, where they'll actually have 3D printed faces that swap in and out. But there's a lot of detail we can go into that, but you can see that there's a couple different ways to build that. So if you like more hands-on stuff, that's a job you can work on. 3D characters, you got 3D modeling here. So modeling is building the actual model. Rigging is building those underlying skeletons that go underneath the model. So you have little action figure posing thing that you can do with it. Surfacing will be designing like what the actual textures and stuff that are on the character, and in simulation you can see that they're kind of learning how the fur will work. So that we, again, as I was saying, no one wants to animate all that fur. So you have the computer, but you also have to plan tell the computer how do you want to look, especially once you start getting into more stylized films, right? So the way you want to handle water in one thing, like something like Spider-Verse, will be different than you want to handle it in Frozen 2, which had a more realistic one. Yeah, here's an example of rigging. So this one's kind of neat because you see how they're doing the rig within a stop motion puppet there. It's very similar to what you're thinking. They're basically with a little more complexity into a 3D model, but there's underlying things you're building that skeleton that they use to create things. So this one's a really interesting field. Not a lot of people think about it as a job career, but it's very, very vital. So if you become a really good rigger, you can get some good job security there because it's not exactly the most like flashy job thing, but it's very cool. It's a little bit on the more technical side on the 3D one, so that's something you can check out there. Oh, and here's a fun example of how a puppet rig works in 2D animation. So this is a little bit stylized, but yeah, so this was kind of a cute thing that they showed me. This is puppet animation.
That was hella funny. And that's really how they make an episode of Bluey?
This is a faked one, so this isn't exactly what they use because they can't use the.
That was like her dream. Like she was dreaming that.
Yeah, so this is a fake of it for the show because they can't use the actual program and stuff for it. But you get the idea of like this is how a 2D puppet rig would work. Yes.
There were so many of my peers, like when we saw that clip, we were like, I mean, it's almost like Adobe Animate, but not quite. It's like and it's almost like Harmony, but not quite. Did they fake this, or is this a program that none of us know about? So there's like mass speculation.
Yeah, I think I found a thread eventually where someone's like, yeah, this is fake because obviously licensing and stuff. But you guys get the idea across. A nice little clip for this. You can see how it works on a 2D one also.
It just reminds me of the classic, like, what was it, Looney Tunes episode with Daffy, where the hand like keeps changing.
Oh yeah.
And it's like the flower or whatever his head, the flag.
Duck unlock, I think it was called.
So yeah. So that's rigging. It's in a lot of different things: 2D, 3D, and everything except for the frame-to-frame animation doesn't have rigging. That's where you're drawing literally each one. So blocking and layout. So blocking is when you're kind of showing where. So this is an example of.
Okay, so how do I look?
So you can see how they're not really animated when you're blocking out. You're just trying to see where everything
like
is.
a dog do.
So because like you're not gonna waste the time animating the whole block cycle because you don't know if it works yet.
Well, go on up.
You don't need to know if they're talking. You just want to see how the shot looks. So that's some high quality walking.
Remember that sausage factory?
Yeah, again, it's all about like you have to do all this planning, so you have to be efficient with how you're working out there. 2D animation, they'll do a lot of like pencil tests, rough layout here to figure out how it works before they go through the whole thing clean up one. So there's a whole thing where they practice one, so it's a little easier now with digital. You don't have to go to a whole different department to do it, but you know, you still got to do like you draw out. So like you'll see if you ever see people's process, they'll usually do like stick figures animated out first, with like just a couple of balls and joints to get the feel for the timing and the flow of the animation before they go into something more complex, and especially before they go and clean it up. And it's all so then again, it's all very similar as far as much. Bad Guys was interesting because they actually had a 2D animator show, kind of do a pass on it for what the animation would be like. So you can see kind of like the really rough blocking behind. I forget what the artist's name was for that did the 2D animation. But then the 3D animators, you actually use that as a basis, and that's where you get that really stylized push animation from.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, it is really, really neat that they did that. And see, no water there, because that comes out of the FX.
Here. I'm giving it all back. Excuse me.
So you see just floating on air, because that's the part, those crowds were simulated. So that also comes in later on with that one. So those were actually simmed crowds because it's just a big mass. It's really interesting. If you get the art book for it, they actually treated those masses of police officers like just a big wall of water floating around. And then and here's another block. So these are also nice as you can kind of see the whole process of how it goes through the production side there. Yeah, so this one is Robin, which I'm trying to remember, was this Aardman? Yeah, this was Aardman also. It's on Netflix. But this one they would also do like a 2D pass, drawing out everything before they go through and do plan everything out in there. So this is these are reference images from the animators where they're trying to figure out what it looks like, which is great when it's an animal and you can't actually do it. So if you ever get an animation, be prepared to have really goofy footage of yourself.
Yes,
You do not have to share it online, but it might find its way out there.
I was like, that
But
should
this is part of the plan. They planned it all out.
Storyboarding.
You can see that, so before getting in all the effects for where those things will go, they have an idea of drawing it out first, because that's easier than actually animating out all those dirt piles and stuff. So once you get all that, so you saw those shots were all very simple. So lighting doesn't come in until later on. And also with all the effects and stuff, those will often come later on. So I've seen a couple different pipelines describe this as either being part of the production process or the post-production process. So again, that's one of those things where it may differ based on where you work at. Basically, keeping knows that all the lighting and a lot of the visual effects that'll come later on, like if you see Spider-Verse and things like that. I have some clips of that for the process there. You see, those are all get added on later on after the shot is locked, because you can't be scribbling all that and then be like, oh, this shot doesn't work actually. The same thing, like you want to make sure the shot works before you go and color and shade everything onto a 2D drawing. Same thing there. You can kind of see some of that. So,
Hey!
so you can see kind of like how it goes through the whole process there, where a lot of these lighting effects are come after. Again, it's like debating on whether it's production, still part of production process or post-production, but it's at the end phase, right? You make sure the shot works before you make it all pretty and add those like dust layers and things like that, or bring in those special effects and those lighting. Especially like there's Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles up there where they added a lot of 2D drawings for all the effects. I think they did all the effects with 2D was one of their guidelines in there. So that all comes later on with that one. That's cool.
I organize that shit.
Hey, hold on. Good to see you out there. Sound design, that also gets brought. So this is kind of brought in throughout the whole process. Like I mentioned, there's scratch recording usually going on throughout, especially adding it to the animatics as you get more on there. And then you also usually have the dialogue recorded before so that the actor, with their animators, will need that to match the mouth movements on there. So sound design, sound mixing, and engineering is also a job that's in there. There's a lot of different post-production jobs that people don't think about in here. So, like localization is a whole department. Editing is one that I'll touch on a little bit there. Like correcting, working on that. Yeah. So production management, editorial are two big ones that kind of go throughout the whole process there. Production management is basically organizing and tracking everything. So you can see there's a lot of different steps that go through the animation process. So you have to be tracking each shot that goes through, like, hey, which shots are in post-production, which ones are ready for an animatic to get submitted to director for approval before we can move those forward. You know, production management is basically tracking all those moving parts and making sure that nothing's getting held up there. And then editorial, normally in a live action film, editorial is done at the end, but you'll note that, like, again, we have animatics and stuff. So in an animated film, editorial is usually brought in a lot earlier in the process than a live action film, because they have to be putting those animatics and stuff together. Yeah, so I wanted to mention this one. Technical artist was one that I neglected to mention as much in the past, but I told about all those effects. So if you're really techie, like, you know, a lot of furries are into the tech side of things and technology, a lot of that is very important nowadays. Where if you like art, but you're also very good at programming stuff, programming like the effects, like all the little dot effects and the glow on those characters inside out, that was in the art. And they drew all this beautiful dot art and things like that. But the models are just smooth models, because you're not going to model 5 million tiny individual dots. There's actually programmers and technical artists that were familiar with computer technology that helped develop the tools.
I heard that like the dots are actually an accident, I think. But like a happy accident. They were like, hey, we actually kind of like that effect. Let's leave it like that. I don't know.
That's possible.
I heard that.
There's a lot of happy accidents
Right.
in the creative process, so that's totally believe that.
Would the requirements for this just be a portfolio too, or would it also require like?
Yes, technical artist does require a portfolio. It's actually one of the things that Brick offers apprenticeships for is that I have to be a technical artist apprentice. And this is also neat because it also is applicable to the games industry as well. Again, programming side, creating that. So if you're very familiar with that. So usually if you have a portfolio for this, you're kind of showing like how you can create these special effects and stuff with different programs.
This is required to be here.
No, usually, so that's none of these jobs typically require degrees. If you have a good portfolio, your art will speak for itself. Art school and things can help with giving you that experience, that discipline, but never feel like you need to pay for a run for art school if you're able to put in the work yourself. If your portfolio looks, no recruiter ever really looks at what school you go to, as far as I've ever heard. I've never heard a recruiter say that in the animation industry say they care about what school you're going to. They only look at your portfolio. If your portfolio is good, then if you're went to the school of YouTube and your portfolio looks amazing, that's good for them. If you went to the Fancies Art School and your portfolio looks terrible, they're not going to be like, well, they went to a good art school, so we'll hire them. So, yeah, portfolio is everything in art jobs. But yeah, but even if you're not an artist, there's a lot of studio side jobs. Again, that's where I work a lot in. So production management, recruiting, HR, marketing, legal business. And it's nice because I'll say that you do get to work with, being able to work with creatives in there and get that exposure, and again, it's help be a part of the process. It's very nice. Like, and they appreciate that. Like you'll see in Disney films, if you ever look, there is a caffeination specialist, which is just the guy that runs the coffee shop that's in the lobby at the Disney animation studio, and they are in the credits. So something to keep in mind there. Then people that train the tools. DreamWorks is a starting position for a couple of folks at DreamWorks as a trainer on how to use tool sets. So the animators and stuff come in who learn how to use the different ones that they have. Because most studios, a lot of the big studios will have their own proprietary tool sets, so they'll need to train up the animators and stuff from that also. So here's just a couple more examples of this. We're kind of nearing the end here, but you can kind of see you got storyboards and how it kind of progresses for everything for each shot. A lot of different steps there. So some quick things to touch on. Go to the next one. There's very different experience between TV and feature. A lot of this has to do with the turnaround times. Feature films can take multiple years to develop. A lot of the production's done in-house, like I was mentioning before. So you have different approaches to storyboards. You have different approaches to how they handle story and who's going to be talking to who and how things get approved. Versus TV. Things have much faster turnaround. Oftentimes, there'll be people that are the storyboard artists will be almost like quasi-directors sometimes on those ones. What they need will be different. Like I mentioned, some of the model sheets for things that have overseas productions will need to be much tighter. And the job availability will also be different, right? Like some people I mentioned wanted to become character designers, and feature character designer is highly competitive because there's only so many feature films that come out a year, and then versus like a television show, there's a lot more television shows to come out. The skill sets are kind of similar, but just one thing to keep in mind is that since there are some slight differences in terms of what they're looking for, then you might keep that in mind, like, hey, I want to make sure I have some stuff that's also geared toward TV side if I want to increase my odds of getting hired. Or if you just really want to do feature, then focus on that. Indie productions, again, for those of you who want to see really cool stuff about indie production, Lackadaisy has a panel tomorrow at 11 a.m. So be sure to check that out. Okay. It's great. We love Lackadaisy here, and there's lots of cool stuff happening in this scene. One of the big ones is, like I was mentioning before, Flow is a film that came out recently that was all done in Blender. There's a lot of cool things. Indie productions may be more, you may have to do more things at one time, because usually smaller teams. But I mean, that's not always true, right? Some of those teams are very organized and very impressively structured, like Spindle Force and Lackadaisy, Iron Circus.
Yeah, we're Iron Circus.
Iron Circus, yeah, like Iron Circus stuff. Like they've got whole like organized machines going at this point. But you have other ones that are like, hey, you're going to have to do all these different steps on your own. But there's a lot of great tools out there for hacking your own thing. And a lot of people will actually just create animatics. I know a person watching epic musical stuff, and people just make animatics for that and put that on and get practice. And they do that all independently. Yeah. Cool. So we're pretty much wrapped up here. Here's a couple of resources that you can look at. There's a lot of really cool free stuff online now on YouTube. I know both the Brick Foundation and Asians Animation, we do speaker series where we talk to industry professionals, and we just put those online for free. So there is one that's just Sony creators going through their pipeline telling you how to get a job at Sony Pictures Animation, and that's free online and straight from recruiters. And there's a lot of free resources on there. Like Pixar has their whole pipeline up for free that you can look up and study how to do that. Sergio Paulo Animation put down a bunch of stuff, and it has James Baxter. That's it. Yeah, James Baxter, that guy from the horse thing. If you're wondering why that person is so famous for the horse, you can find a lot of videos from him on Sergio Paulo Animation, all free for you to look at. So there's some really amazing resources you can look at on there. And I'm also here, so yeah, hopefully that gave you some insight into it. Animation is very complex, but it's very rewarding. I always love this quote from one of the forefathers of animation, who named Gertie the dinosaur. You know, that's like, you didn't really copyright it because if you want to get into this thing, you're welcome to join the club. It's a lot of work, it's very rewarding, and hopefully this gave you some motivation and insight.
He understood it was a job for masochists. So thanks. I think that's pretty much it. If anyone has any questions or anything, we have time to go through it.
I was just gonna say, to a more niche extent, there's also like source filmmaker.
Yes, source filmmaker. Hey, those are all Unreal. Unreal is actually
really cool stuff.
Yeah, source filmmaker is great to get started with. One of the big things in animation that people might be overlooking right now is Unreal animation is really big because people are doing virtual production now. So learning to animate in Unreal as a tool is not just relevant to games, but also relevant to filmmaking. So there's a lot of things. I will say one thing with tool sets, for those of you that are wanting to learn, don't stress certain tool sets are important to learn, but generally, if you can create the end product, people don't care whether you're animating in Blender or Maya or by hand, like Gmod. Yeah, or Gmod. Your animation will, the quality of the animation will shine through, even if you're animating in Gmod. You know.
You can see the animation on the planet right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my god, it's
true. Yes. What room is the Lackadaisy panel in?
Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Yeah.
Salons 1 through 6, 11 a.m. Lackadaisy panel tomorrow.
They'll show some behind the scenes for us.
Yeah. So now when they're showing all the behind the scenes, be like, I know that. That's a storyboard. I know that. That's and they'll be like, they skipped completely on this.
That's that many fewer questions we have to answer. More interesting stuff in the Q&A.
Yeah. That should be really exciting. Yes.
Is it possible to share these slides?
Yeah, I can share these slides. I'm trying to think what's the best one. I'll throw them on my. I'll post a link on my Blue Sky later on. What's a good way to share these?
It's like Dagger 6 art.
Yeah, my Blue Sky is just Dagger 6 art. I don't know if there's a way to share it.
anyone with links?
Copy a link.